Okay, welcome back. This is our second lecture video for Chapter 1, and we're going to talk about cells and the structure of cells of some of our microbes. So the first way that we divide cells are by whether they are prokaryotic or eukaryotic. If a cell is prokaryotic, that would be this cell on top here. They have DNA that is just floating around in the cytoplasm. It's not enclosed within a membrane. Eukaryotes, however, have their DNA within a nucleus. So when you see a nucleus, you know you are dealing with a eukaryotic cell. Its genetic material, its DNA is kept within its nucleus. And that nucleus is surrounded by a nuclear membrane. So our prokaryotes are going to include bacteria and archaea. Our eukaryotes are going to include fungi, protozoa, and algae. So I want you to think for a minute, do you know what human cells would be categorized? So human cells have a nucleus, so that means that humans are eukaryotic organisms. So let's look at some of these. Bacteria. Do you remember if bacteria are prokaryotic or eukaryotic? They're prokaryotic. Fungi, which are they? Are fungi prokaryotic or eukaryotic? Fungi are eukaryotic. They have a nucleus. Protozoans, which are protozoans? Protozoans are eukaryotic. They have a nucleus. Algae, what are algae? Algae are eukaryotic. We have a nucleus. Now I'm going to kind of try to trick you here. What about viruses? Viruses weren't discussed on that last slide because viruses are not prokaryotes. Viruses are not eukaryotes. Viruses are not cells. So viruses are not made of cells, so they are neither prokaryotic nor eukaryotic. They are acellular. Then archaea, I don't have a picture of archaea here, but do you remember our archaea eukaryotic or prokaryotic? Our archaea are prokaryotic. They do not have a nucleus. And multicellular animal parasites. So these would be things like heartworms, things that are animals but they're parasites. Animals are all eukaryotic because we all have a nucleus. When we talk about bacteria, these are cells that are simple and unicellular. Unicellular means that only one cell makes up the entire organism. One cell, one bacteria, that's the entire thing. They are prokaryotic because they do not have a nucleus. They have cell walls made of peptidoglycan. That means that their entire cell is surrounded by peptidoglycan. That is actually a really important concept to know because that peptidoglycan will have a lot of effect on how antibiotics can interact with the bacteria. It'll have a big effect on how our immune system can recognize that there is something there. It'll have an effect on how those cells will be able to grow, how they'll be able to tolerate different types of environment. So peptidoglycan in their cell walls is a rather important concept to remember. Bacteria multiply by binary fission. That means that the cell just gets bigger and bigger and splits in half. There are bacteria that have very diverse types of energy sources. So if there is an energy source on the planet, there is probably a bacteria that can use it. Bacteria can use organic chemicals like sugars and fats. There are bacteria that can use inorganic chemicals. There are bacteria that can do photosynthesis to get energy. Then bacteria also come in different shapes. Bacillus means rod-like, so a bacteria shaped like a bacillus will look kind of like a tic-tac. There are some that are spherical. Spherical bacteria are called cocci. And there are some that are spiral or shaped like a corkscrew, like a curly hair or an old-time telephone cord. So this bacteria in the picture, how would you categorize this bacteria or this bacteria? So that's shaped like a long rod. It's longer than it is round. So that is a bacillus. Some bacteria have to just kind of float around wherever the water or the air takes them. But a lot of bacteria are able to intentionally move themselves. They kind of swim around because they have flagella. Flagella are little arms or hairs that come off of them that can just spin around and allow bacteria to move towards or away from something. Our next category of cells are archaea. This is probably the category that you are least likely to have heard of because this very last point. Archaea do not cause disease in humans. Because they don't cause disease, they're just kind of ignored mostly. But archaea are still some important bacteria or some important prokaryotes that we're going to discuss. So archaea are prokaryotic. They lack peptidic glycan, so they are very different from bacteria because they don't have that peptidic glycan in their cell wall. If they have a cell wall, it will be made of something called pseudomurine. And something cool about archaea is that they are found in extreme environments. So they can be found in intestines, especially intestines of cows and things, in your intestines even, where they will produce methane. So if you've ever heard of cows make a lot of methane, it's not actually the cows themselves, it's the methanogens in their intestines. So methanogens are archaea that produce methane as a result of them digesting food. Extreme halophiles. So extreme means they're in an extreme environment. Halo means salt, and phile means loving. So they love salt. They love extreme salt. So we are talking about the Great Salt Lake, the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is called the Dead Sea because it is so salty nothing can live there. Even people aren't supposed to stay in it for more than a few minutes because of how salty it is. It can just dry out your body. But archaea love it there. They love extreme salt. There are extreme thermophiles. So extreme again means they love something extreme. Here what they love is thermo or temperature. They love high heat. So they live in very hot, especially sulfurous water, very hot environments. So this would be something like hot springs. Boiling water, which would, instantly injure you, instantly kill a lot of things, is perfect springtime weather for an archaea. So there's 3 categories of archaea. Please be aware of them. Please be able to describe them, list the three categories, and also describe if I ask you one of them. Be able to tell me they are prokaryotic, they lack peptidic glycan, and do not cause disease. Next, let's get into our eukaryotes. First are our fungi. Fungi also have cell walls, but instead of being protein, sugary, like we saw in our prokaryotes, in our eukaryotes, our cell walls are going to be more just basic sugars. In fungi, it's a sugar called chitin. All fungi have to consume an organic chemical for energy. They are not plants. They do not do photosynthesis. So you will see them like growing on a decaying log, growing on an old orange, somewhere where they are breaking down whatever they're living on and ingesting that as their energy source. Fungi can be multicellular, such as molds and mushrooms. They can also be unicellular, such as yeast. And they have pretty complicated reproductive strategies. They can go through both asexual and sexual reproductive cycles. We're not going to get into much detail at this point about how they reproduce, but they are pretty cool in their complicated ways that they respond to being able to reproduce. So this here would be mold. All right, that looks like mold. You can tell that, right? And here, these are yeast molecules reproducing, just budding off little pieces of yeast. Next are protozoans. Protozoans are eukaryotic, and what does that mean? That means they have a nucleus. Protozoans are all unicellular. That means one cell, one organism. It's complete. One cell, one organism. It's complete. They can move by what's called amoebic movement, which is what's going on in this cell here, which is shifting out a little piece of its cytoplasm called a pseudopod. Here it's shifting out a little piece of cytoplasm, making a pseudopod. So the pseudopod stretches out, grabs down, and it can just kind of move the cell this way. This little piece can shift out and move. So this cell is gradually moving kind of in this direction. Protozoans can live as free entities, just hanging out in water, growing on their own. A lot of protozoans are parasites that will live inside of another cell. They all have to get their nutrients from another source. So it'll either absorb something or ingest it. Here the cell is using its pseudopods to kind of wrap around these particles of food. I'm just grabbing this little particle of food, grabbing this little particle of food. It's going to wrap around it and bring it into its cell to eat it. They can reproduce sexually or asexually. Mainly we'll probably only talk about asexual reproduction in this class. And besides moving with pseudopods, they can also move with cilia, which are these little hair things here that can just kind of beat and let it move. Or with flagella, which would be a long hair coming off it. Next are algae. Algae are eukaryotes, and they're kind of, you can see them as an ancestor of plants. They have cellulose in their cell walls, which is very similar to what plants do. They do photosynthesis. They can produce oxygen and sugars from their photosynthesis, very similar to what plants do. Algae can be unicellular, such as diatoms, or they can be multicellular, such as seaweed and kelp. You can see all the green here. This is seaweed or kelp growing in this water. This is algae. Algae can be found in fresh water. They can be found in salt water, and they can be found in soil. And then last is our viruses. As I mentioned before, viruses are acellular. They're not made of cells, so they are very different from the other organisms we're going to talk about. They consist of either a piece of DNA or a piece of RNA. That's their core nucleotide, DNA or RNA. And around that is a protein coat. So this kind of shell around it made of proteins. Sometimes around that shell there may be a lipid membrane, so just a membrane around it. One thing about viruses, they cannot replicate on their own. They can't reproduce and multiply on their own. They have to get inside of another cell where they're going to take over that cell and turn that cell into a little virus factory. So they're called obligate intracellular parasites. Obligate means they're obligated to live in one way. The way they're obligated to live is inside a cell, intracellular. They only can reproduce inside a cell. So they're intracellular. And when they get inside your cell, they take over that cell. They don't let you keep doing what you want to do with this cell. They're going to harm your cell. They're going to kill your cell in the process. So they are parasites. So obligate intracellular parasite is a way to describe how viruses exist. There are viruses that can infect animals. This would include things like coronaviruses, flu viruses, Ebola viruses. There are viruses that infect plants and only plants. There are viruses that infect bacteria and only bacteria. These pictures here are bacteriophages. Those are viruses that only infect bacteria. And there are viruses that only infect archaea. Viruses are going to be pretty specific for what they infect. So here we have HIV viruses. They only infect your T cells. They aren't going to infect like your eyeballs or your toes. They are pretty specific for your T cells. And so viruses that infect plants are not going to infect animals or bacteria. Viruses that infect bacteria are not going to infect archaea or animals. They're pretty specific for what they can stick to and infect. And then let's talk about multicellular animal parasites. So because these cause disease, because they're parasites, they get thrown in to our discussion of microbiology. Even though they're not really microbes, you can see a worm on your own. But these are animals. They're multicellular. They're eukaryotic. One specific type of parasite we'll often talk about are helminths. Helminth means a worm. So flatworms, hookworms, a lot of phyla of invertebrates are included as helminths. If they're a worm, we'll count them as a helminth. Technically, they do have microscopic stages in their life cycle. I suppose all animals do as eggs, but we mainly discuss them only in terms of causing disease. We can classify microbes into 3 domains, and these 3 domains are bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. So you can see 2 of these domains are prokaryotic and 1 is eukaryotic. The eukaryotes include protists, which would be protozoans and algae, the fungi, which are yeast, molds, and mushrooms, plants, and animals. When we look at these 3 domains, even though it's very easy to say bacteria and archaea, those little things are all the same, they're very distinctly different from each other. So archaea are prokaryotic, bacteria are prokaryotic, eukarya are all eukaryotic. When we look at the cell wall, archaea typically have pseudomurine, bacteria have peptidic glycan, and eukarya will have some sort of carbohydrates, unless we're animals, which don't have any cell wall. Lipids are different in these. We're not going to talk about them. The first amino acid in protein synthesis is different, although you can see archaea are more similar to eukaryotes than they are to bacteria. Another place where a good case is made for having 3 domains instead of just prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Bacteria are sensitive to antibiotics, so you can kill a bacteria with something like penicillin, although you can't kill archaea or eukaryotes with that. Really what I want you to know is cell type and cell wall and antibiotic sensitivity. Those are the important parts on this video. When we classify organisms, that's called taxonomy. This gives a universal system and a naming system. And when we group them, these organisms according to properties, this is phylogenetics. So we can say these things are all animals, these things are all plants. That's phylogenetics. And that implies that a group of organisms came from a common ancestor. So all animals came from one common ancestor, all plants came from one common ancestor. Before that, all eukaryotes came from one common ancestor. And we can classify organisms based on some different techniques. One is to look at the ribosomal RNA. RNA is something that is included in all cells. It's used to make proteins and it always has RNA in it. So we can see how similar or different it is. For things that we can't get to the ribosomal RNA, we can also look at anatomy or its appearance, or just, fossils to look at preserved remains. When we're specifically saying what makes something a prokaryotic species, we're talking about cells that have similar characteristics, similar ribosomal RNA, similar shape, similar cell wall thickness. They're going to have similar characteristics. We can divide that down a little bit more. A culture is a group of cells grown in laboratory media. So when we're in lab, we grow things on a plate. That's a culture. A clone is a population of cells that came from one single cell. So one single cell starts dividing and dividing and dividing and dividing, makes lots of cells, but they all have the same DNA. They're all genetically identical, so they're all a clone. And then a strain is genetically different cells within that clone. When we classify viruses, because they're not alive, they're not made of cells, we have to classify them a little bit differently. So we're going to look at viruses to classify them as a species based on having similar characteristics. So they all have DNA, they all have RNA, they're all going to be similar, they're all going to have an envelope or not. And they'll occupy a particular ecological niche. So we can say these are plant viruses, these are bacterial viruses, they infect bacteria or they infect plants or whatever they infect. That's part of what makes them into a viral species. Within our eukaryotes, we have animals, plants, fungi, and protists. Animals are multicellular. We don't have cell walls. And we are chemoheterotrophic. That means we gotta eat. You are not going to get energy from standing in the sun. You gotta eat something. Plants are multicellular. They have cell walls made of cellulose. And they are photoautotrophic. That means they can do photosynthesis. They get their energy from photosynthesis. They get their food from doing photosynthesis. They make it all themselves. Fungi are chemoheterotrophic. So they don't have a mouth to eat, but they're going to have to grow on something else that they break down and bring into their cells to get energy. They can be unicellular or multicellular. We talked about molds and mushrooms and yeast. Their cell walls are made of chitin. And we'll come back and talk about how spores and hyphae are used for their reproduction and growth. And then protists are kind of that junk drawer where when I am organizing my kitchen, I have a distinct place for where all my plates go, a distinct place for where my bowls go, my cups go. Here is where I have spoons and forks. And then there is the junk drawer where there's rubber bands, an old menu, some pens, birthday candles. They're not necessarily all related to each other. They just don't fit anywhere else. That's what our protists are, kind of the stuff that doesn't fit anywhere else. Within the protists, there's even a lot of discussion of breaking them down into specific Currently, they're divided into clades, but perhaps instead of using this term protist, just have specific different kingdoms or groups that are based on more similarities within them instead of just being the junk drawer. So at this point, you should be able to tell me, how do prokaryotes and eukaryotes compare? Why are they two different names? What does that mean? What groups of microbes are prokaryotes and which are eukaryotes? You can describe bacteria, archaea, fungi, algae, protozoa, helminths, and viruses. And you can tell me what are the 3 domains. I will see you back in part 3 for chapter 1, where we are going to start discussing some of the history of microbiology. What kind of stuff has been done before us? And how did we get to where we are now? Okay, see you later. Bye.